This is Joker. The mission is go.
In the early 2010s, the gaming industry was struggling with a rapid metamorphosis. As the 7th console generation neared its end, the Western gaming industry had firmly established itself as a dominant force in the console market. In the wake of Western games reaching record-breaking sales numbers, developers across the globe began to fixate on delivering the next big AAA console release, no matter the cost. And that's to say nothing of the increasing reliance on DLC and patches, which were still in their infancy at the time.
Who cares if Mass Effect 3 was 90% DLC that was locked on the disc? That doesn't mean anything.
When confronted with such a titanic shift in the industry, it was kill or be killed for companies, their series, and even entire game genres, with the traditional turn-based RPG among them. Many were convinced that there just wasn't a place for turn-based RPGs in the mainstream market anymore. A sentiment that went hand in hand with weirdly prevalent xenophobic opinions about Japanese games. And yet, in spite of this shifting climate, there was one unassuming game that still managed to make a name for itself.
We are living our lives.
The impact of Persona 4's release in 2008 ended up being what the Shin Megami Tensei series needed to finally break into the Western market. While Shin Megami Tensei 3 and Persona 3 were cult classics in their own right, Persona 4 was different. In spite of a rapidly changing industry, Persona 4 found a hardcore following and long-lasting success well beyond its initial release. At the absolute height of its popularity, Persona 4 received an anime adaptation, an updated re-release on a PlayStation Vita, and even a fighting game by ArcSys, all within roughly a year of each other. Persona 4's runaway success meant fan anticipation was sky high for the game's inevitable sequel, Persona 5. Now, if you were a curious fan who went searching for even a trace of info related to Persona 5 around this time, the odds were good you would have stumbled across something unexpected: Persona 5 itself. Or rather, the entirety of Persona 5's soundtrack, readily accessible online. A lonely little channel by the name of Atlas XP5 had uploaded a plethora of songs from Persona 5 onto YouTube, including the likes of battle themes, cutscene tracks, and area songs. Moreover, the channel was plastered with artwork and branding that seemed to be completely original. There were a few uploads of full-on trailers, press releases of story info, and even remixes from a Reincarnation album, not dissimilar to Persona 3 and 4's own Reincarnation albums. Even stranger is that the earliest upload from this channel was in early 2012, around the same time Atlas was still capitalizing hard on Persona 4's success. Moreover, this was nearly 2 years before the formal announcement of the Persona 5 that everyone is more familiar with. So what's the deal with this other Persona 5 then? Where did it come from and what was it all building up to? Was it all a giant PR stunt by Atlas themselves to drum up hype, or was there another mastermind pulling the strings? Strap yourselves in, it's finally time for someone to tackle the mystery behind the original Persona 5, the Persona 5 Imagining Project. Information on the Persona 5 Imagining Project was mainly shared through two media channels, Atlas XP5's official YouTube channel as well as their own Twitter account. Unfortunately, that Twitter account has been deactivated for several years at this point. While the YouTube channel is still around, several videos have been privated over time, and barring secondhand re-uploads and a few mirrored posts, neither of these accounts were properly archived through the years. The project didn't even have a dedicated website. Atlas XP5's channel simply redirects back to the official Persona channel website, further casting doubt over the project's legitimacy. According to what remains of Atlas XP5's various posts and uploads, the Persona 5 Imagining Project was touted as a sequel to Persona 4, slated for release in late 2012 for the PlayStation 3. The thing is, no gameplay footage from the Persona 5 Imagining Project actually exists. Barring a few exceptions, the videos on Atlas XP5's channel were almost entirely uploads of songs from the alleged game. Because basically no other content from the supposed game exists, these songs are how the Persona 5 Imagining Project establishes much of its tone and identity. So yes, at first glance, the Persona 5 Imagining Project is nothing more than a glorified music playlist. On the one hand, passing something off as a game with no gameplay footage is a very tough look. On the other hand, it's easy to forget about when the songs themselves are so good. The soundtrack to the Persona 5 Imagining project covers a wide range of genres, mainly centered around jazz, house, and disco, along with elements of other genres like rock, pop, electronic, and hip-hop. Despite the somewhat eclectic blend of genres, the Imagining project manages to invoke a smooth, classy sound all throughout its runtime. The result is a soundtrack that can switch between an array of different sounds and moods without ever feeling inconsistent or incongruous. Of course, the musical styling of the Persona 5 Imagining project doesn't sound anything like Shoji Meguro's work in Persona 3 and 4. It's better. The soundtrack is like if the looser musical styling of Blood Blockade Battlefront was mixed with Neo The World Ends With You's unabashed J-rock influence. From the vocal-heavy dungeon themes, the varied character themes, the catchy shop jingles, it's all really damn good. To say that these songs make up the backbone of the Persona 5 Imagining project would be a tremendous understatement. Not only does the soundtrack to the Persona 5 Imagining project imbue the project with a unique, classy sense of style, but it also holds some of the biggest clues about what the story might have even been about. Similarly to how Persona 3 and 4 were characterized by their prominent blue and yellow color motifs, the Persona 5 Imagining project embraces a motif of its own: monochromatic. Every song uploaded on the channel is accompanied by promotional splash screens of characters in various shades of black, white, and gray. The most common visual across these uploads is the main piece of key art for the Imagining project, the game's nameless protagonist despondently cradling his head into his hands. More significant than the familiar blue butterfly beside him is the shadow of a hand grasping a control bar, a tool used by marionettists to control puppets by manipulating and pulling the strings. The use of puppet imagery is recurrent throughout the entirety of the project, as puppets and puppet strings are prominent across much of the project's promotional material. This theming is further reinforced in the titling of various songs, such as Pulling the Strings, Marionette, and Control Freak, suggesting that the project's central theme was control and manipulation. One of the two surviving promotional videos even closes with the phrase, "You are nobody's fool, you are nobody's puppet," among other phrases of note. It's through this promotional material that one can find another bit of recurring imagery throughout the project: mirrors, more specifically the reflections of ourselves and others. In addition to two song titles related to mirrors, one of the two promotional videos outright shows the nameless protagonist conversing with what appears to be a warped reflection of himself, alleging that the protagonist isn't some mere amnesiac, but is wrapped in a delusion of their own creation, lying to themselves. While easy to dismiss this as a simple callback to the shadows in Persona 4, the second promotional video, Smoke and Mirrors, is far less subtle about the mirror imagery.
Mirror, mirror on the wall. A phrase from an old familiar tale beckons us to the fountain of illusions. The face of someone who looks like you, reflected on the surface of a lowering mirror.
This may also play into the theming of dungeons, implied to be set in alternate versions of in-game locations. Given that the song Mirror Mirror immediately precedes the first dungeon theme, Distorted Mall, it can be inferred that these distorted areas are warped reflections of different locales that you'd visit in-game. Based on all surviving information, it seems like the overall tone for the Persona 5 Imagining project would have been much darker than Persona 3 and 4, more akin to the first two Personas, and by extension, mainline Shin Megami Tensei. Nyarlathotep in particular is not only mentioned repeatedly, but even seems to be allied with the protagonist this time around, referring to them as Apprentice in one of the project's story previews. These story previews also go into more detail on other aspects of the game's narrative, showcasing dialogue and detailing the story's different acts. It seems like the story was gonna span anywhere from 4 to 5 acts, starting off with talks of child soldiers and experimentation on Persona users before ending on some outlandishly apocalyptic story beats. The Imagining project goes even deeper than this, but I think you know enough now to see that this wasn't just some normal amateurish production. At no point did Atlas XP5 release footage of an actual game, immediately raising red flags of this alleged Persona 5's authenticity. The various uploads did nothing to address these questions, instead offering curious viewers small pieces to a larger puzzle, various connections and clues to a story carefully tucked away across various uploads, just waiting to be pieced back together. And that's to say nothing of the promotional material, which seemed to be too high quality and legitimate for a simple fan to just come up with from out of the blue. There were too many lingering questions for this all to be going nowhere. The Persona 5 Imagining project had to be building up to something, right? In November 2013, Atlus formally announced Persona 5 for the PlayStation 3, then slated for release in 2014. There was no other info to share, but the message was clear. Persona 5 is now in development. By this point, there's no hiding what the Persona 5 Imagining project really was.
It's fiction. It's an urban legend that never happened. We made it up. It's a made-up tale. It's a total fabrication. It never happened.
All of that official artwork of the Imagining project's characters that was shown off, all taken from existing sources and edited down to fit the project's vision. The seemingly original, never-before-heard music that the entire project was built around, all sourced from dozens of different albums. While YouTube's copyright detection system easily dispels the illusion by revealing the actual song info nowadays, it was a lot easier to sell the facade when the system was relatively new back in 2012. Though, to be fair, the truth was always there in plain sight. The descriptions of each video explicitly state the original source of the songs. In Japanese, that is. Call me crazy, but I doubt that the average, everyday internet user at the time would have even suspected to run that text through Google Translate. In essence, the Persona 5 Imagining project is someone's personal patchwork pastiche, their own interpretation of what Persona 5 could have been. Depending on how you want to see it, the Imagining project is either a hybrid between a concept album and a mixtape, or merely a piece of glorified fan fiction. This project wasn't some everyday amateur hour nonsense either. Whoever the mastermind was, they really put in the work to sell you on the idea that this was the real deal. While some of the original sources for the project's different songs aren't that obscure, most are either from series, artists, or albums that would be practically unknown to the average Westerner at the time. For example, the song Pulling the Strings is actually Mikumo's theme from Suda51's cult classic, The Silver Case. Except by this point in time, The Silver Case wouldn't be released outside of Japan for another 4 years. Almost nobody in the West would even recognize this song during the Imagining project's heyday. Some of the songs were even edited slightly to help sell you on the idea that these were real songs from an actual Persona game. The song Jikanet Tanaka Super Bonus Round starts off with a pitched up version of the Jikanet Tanaka jingle from Persona 3 before cutting into the song Girl the Jump. The boss theme Wildcard is a song taken from a Jazztronic album, with part of the original song cut out and battle sound effects spliced into later parts of the song. Meanwhile, a large number of other songs were just lifted wholesale from other sources. Among these is the boss theme Soul Check, which is just an instrumental version of Kagero Days, the song that would kickstart the Kagero Project series. While Kagero Project would later gain popularity of its own, Kagero Days was only a few months old prior to the Imagining project getting underway. Despite all this talk of how convincing the project was, the truth is that Atlus XP5 didn't fool everybody. The project created enough buzz to catch the eyes of the Persona board on Atlus's now defunct forums, where posters would discuss and analyze the project as it was ongoing. There were definitely some people unsure whether this was legitimate or not, especially because the Imagining project subtitle wasn't initially part of Atlus XP5's branding. It was formally added during a rebranding of the project many months later. Prior to that, Atlus's own forum admins had to chime in and implicitly confirm that the project wasn't officially affiliated with Atlus in any way. As time went on, the Imagining project developed a small audience of its own, leading Atlus XP5 to provide further updates on YouTube and Twitter. In the process, a number of uploads were privated, re-uploaded, or edited in some way. There's enough surviving evidence to suggest that Atlus XP5 kept revising aspects of the project, either shuffling songs around or removing them outright. As a result, a number of Atlas XP5's uploads are completely lost to time, with a number surviving through a dedicated fan blog on Tumblr and old re-uploads on YouTube. And while this falls under anecdotal evidence, I can personally vouch for these re-uploads being accurate to what was originally uploaded on Atlas XP5's channel. Despite updates growing more sparse over time, Atlas XP5 continued expanding the project further, until Atlas's official announcement of Persona 5. The Persona 5 Imagining project would receive no further updates beyond this point. More and more of the channel's videos were privated and unprivated as Atlas XP5 went dark, and as more info on the real Persona 5 started coming out, the Imagining project eventually became a distant memory by those few who still remembered it. At least until April 4th, 2017. On the same day that Persona 5 released outside of Japan, Atlas XP5 uploaded a video for the first time in 5 years. The video, simply titled Goodbye, continues Atlas XP5's trend of cryptic, derivative videos with weirdly high production values. On the surface, the video seems to be a farewell to any remaining fans of the Imagining project now that it's been displaced by the real Persona 5. But in the video's closing moments, the faint outline of the number 2018 can be seen in the background, suggesting that there was still more to come. 2018 would come and go with no further updates. It wasn't until the very first day of 2019 that Atlas XP5 uploaded one more video simply titled Hello. It's only a minute long, featuring a monologue about the nature of reality and imagination, culminating with a remix of the major boss theme from Shin Megami Tensei 2.
You thought this was the end. This is only the start of a new imagination. This is far from over. This is not a dream. This is not a contradiction. This is your reality.
As of this upload, this video is currently Atlas XP5's final update. Looking back on the Persona 5 Imagining project after its abrupt end, the project's entire existence is honestly kind of funny to think about. Absolutely none of Atlas XP5's tricks would work in modern internet culture, which is predicated heavily on a desire to get answers to literally any question ever asked. The moment you wonder why any major gaming company would take such a roundabout approach to marketing their next big release like this, the facade of the whole project shatters. I guarantee you that if a Persona 6 Imagining project released today, it would be picked apart and exposed almost immediately. Because the Persona 5 Imagining project relies heavily on such a huge suspension of disbelief, I don't really think its goal was to trick others into thinking this was the real Persona 5. The project is clearly a labor of love from a dedicated fan, feeling more like an earnest passion project than an ill-spirited attempt to deceive others, though it's unclear whether the project was ever meant to have any kind of payoff. We can only speculate since much of the project remains shrouded in mystery. No one has ever stepped forward with proof that they were the mastermind behind the project, but there are a few suspects from those speculation threads on the Atlas forums. It was believed that one user, Soul Misaki, was involved with the project in some way, reinforced by their extremely coy behavior when pressed about it. Moreover, an archived tweet prior to the deactivation of Atlas XP5's Twitter account actually reveals their identity: Minato Hikari, another user who took part in the speculation thread. It's unclear whether Minato Hikari orchestrated the entire project, was just one of many names involved with the project, or was just handling the Twitter account. We'll probably never know for sure. While the Persona 5 Imagining project faded into obscurity, it hasn't been completely forgotten. One fan still runs a Tumblr dedicated to hosting readily accessible archives of the project, including the Atlas forum posts. A YouTuber known as Asinine Syndrome was even inspired enough to pick up where the Imagining project left off, creating their own story and soundtrack derived from Atlas XP5's existing ideas. Another person even created a mod for the semi-recent PC port of Persona 4 Golden that replaces the game's songs with those of the Imagining project. There have even been a few attempts over the years to turn Atlas XP5's ideas into a fan game. When the Imagining project first started, the Persona series was a real trailblazer among RPGs, a cult classic that enjoyed a steady rise in popularity. Since then, the real Persona 5 ended up releasing to an immense amount of critical and commercial acclaim. And much like most Persona 5 fans, I also have yet to actually play the game myself. Persona 5 has since become the face of the Eastern RPG, with Persona 5's tremendous success becoming just as big a tentpole for Atlus as Persona 4, if not more so. Despite being completely displaced by the tremendous success of the real Persona 5, the Persona 5 Imagining project remains an interesting novelty among fanworks, even those beyond the scope of the Persona series. While the project is inherently derivative in nature, it still manages to paint the picture of a fictional world, mainly through its selection of edited songs, smooth visual style, and loosely interconnected phrases. These different ideas are all presented in such a way that it's possible to imagine the world they're all part of, but never quite enough to see the full picture. It's that same reliance on puzzle piece storytelling that made other online phenomena like Marble Hornet so engaging in their prime. While the Imagining project amounts to little more than a mishmash of a few neat ideas, I feel that the creativity on display here should still be commended, especially for the time in which it was made. Even as an obscure relic of its time, the Persona 5 Imagining project isn't without merit. It's a gateway to music genres, creators, and concepts that maybe wouldn't have been found otherwise. While its nature as an incomplete fan work is to be forgotten by most, it serves as a reminder of the state of the Persona series in the early 2010s. A simpler time, when even as gaming continued to change, Persona 4 and Shin Megami Tensei as a whole remained, clinging to their turn-based roots despite everything else.